Napoleon's last battles. As I said in the intro, this is the TSR version. I don't think there's a lot of differences other than the component difference of the counters being glossy. Alright, let's talk about components. So that's the first thing is the game's essentially Napoleon at Waterloo done on a larger scale. My take on this system is pretty much the same as my take on Napoleon's Art of War, and that's where I refer you to for the rules, because they're mostly the same, except in my intro I did cover some more. The one difference from me is the counters come as glossy side mounters from TSR era, which slide all around and just aren't as cool. This thing doesn't exist. I had to make this myself, and I can't imagine playing without it. Essentially, you need something to keep track of your losses on. You could just use a piece of paper, but I think you want to keep the counters sorted on that piece of paper rather than keep some sort of numeric count, which they have. The maps, as I've said, I like the appearance of these guys. These are, you know, your old SPI free TSR era printing job. Looks like a Simmons and deal here. All the layout's fine. The only thing I'm iffy about that I don't really like is putting the units right on the map for a setup. That works particularly bad in this game. It works okay in most. It works particularly bad in this game because there's multiple scenarios and you're covering 4 different battles, each of which has its own setup, but then for the LaBelle Alliance map, there's a few units that are only applicable in the campaign game, and the same goes, I believe, for the Quatre Bras map, because there's extra forces that weren't actually engaged in Ligny or Quatre Bras, and you give Napoleon the option to use them. In my playthrough, I sent them off to go do something as stupid as they did historically, basically. They didn't get engaged at all in the first day of the battle. What this gives you is this opportunity to play out all 4 of the battles over the 3 days, or at least a confrontation over the area that those 4 battles took place in. If you play, you know, what I ended up with was not those 4 battles. It kind of devolved into something a little different, more like Ligny and Quatre Bras continued on into the next day because the Allies didn't fall back. And then Wavre and Waterloo itself ended up sort of merging together because the Prussians were able to slip behind. Rules-wise, you have this standard, you know, Napoleon at Waterloo style rule set, which some people do not. Oh, J.E. Nelson was on development. He's the guy who did. This is probably for the TSR version. He's the guy who did Trail of the Fox, if I recall correctly. The modification of Desert Fox for the western side after Torch. Okay, anyway. You know, your simple I go, you go type system, movement, combat, locking zones of control. Some people complain about this with the, how can the same system work for a Napoleonic game as it does for World War II? Well, honestly, if you look at World War II games, operational World War II games, they've tended to say, well, this system doesn't work for us. And in some ways, this very, especially with the SPI combat chart that involves pushing units around more than, you know, the Avalon Hill chart, which involved doing damage more, it feels like it works pretty well, actually, for a Napoleonic era. Now, there's some things that I know Marcus Stumpeter has, and previously whoever did for Napoleon's Art of War, also came up with some optional rules to try to, called expanded simplicity. And I can't remember his name. I replied to someone on YouTube after having looked it up, but it's a pain for me to look up because it's hard for me to get into my file cabinet, which is exactly the opposite of why I have a file cabinet. But anyway, you've got your simple, combat strength, movement allowance. Units are able to retreat, and then they have the option to advance, and you can use those advances to kind of cut off other retreats and everything. So there's a little bit of exploitation going in here, but not to the degree that a World War II operational game generally tends to have. So even if some of the core concepts came about in that World War II operational era, it actually probably works better for the Napoleonic tactical. Where it kind of falls apart is you don't have the idea of those thundering cav charges. Bombardments don't really work the way they should. Combined arms is too abstracted for my taste. If I were playing these detailed tactical games, I did that. I did this very battle not too long ago, or this very series of battles, using a more detailed tactical system. This gives you a different flavor. This gives you something, where at first I was thinking, wow, it takes just as much effort to play out the turns as it does in those tactical games. Yeah, it doesn't. It takes a while when you're first getting used to the system, trying to figure out, what units do I, how do I get things into command? What units do I do? Every system takes a while to to integrate into your consciousness, if you want. And this is no exception to that. If you're really used to playing these sort of more simpler eras games, then this probably wouldn't take anywhere near the effort to get used to as it did for me. Anyway, once you kind of get used to what you have to do tactically to launch attacks, you stop thinking so much. You stop counting force factors so much. You kind of count them to say, well, can I attack or not? But if you got enough to get, to the 1 to 2 chart or whatever, you might want to attack anyway, because the combat chart in these is so unpunishing to an attack that, in general, you can set things up so that you can make attacks that have a chance of cutting off the enemy. And as long as they aren't going to put you in a terrible position tactically on his turn, then you probably want to take them so that you get some possibility of wiping out enemy units, because killing units is tough in this system, and you really have to kind of make some low odds attacks and get lucky and make them at the right places. You have to choose your order of attacks and everything. And once you get used to doing that, it all kind of flows fairly easily. One thing that I didn't like too much was because of the size of the map. And I wouldn't have to do this on my normal tactical games with the same sized map. But because there still is a little bit more thinking to the geometry of the game, I found myself switching sides of the table back and forth. Usually, on one player's turn. It's not like I was trying to get a view from a different angle for the different player. No. From one player's turn, I had to really zoom in on what's going on in that little sector of the battle and figure out what all my pieces are doing in a way that I'm not used to. On the other hand, less die rolls, less stuff to keep track of, at least with my little, as long as I keep that little chart with all the combat units on it. The game adds a couple little special rules to it. First off, as optionals, the combined arms, hey, you get a column shift. Okay, that's pretty fair. That reminds me of some of the Dresden special rules, which are like, if you have 2 units of the same command together, you get a bonus, or maybe it was Alao. Alao had little chits that you could expend for a combat bonus if you had all the units of that command in place. Whatever. These are neat little things that give you a little advantage. This also had the idea of demoralization. The main games, the folio games, the single battle games, operate pretty much on you demoralize the enemy, you win. The campaign game works on a different style, though. And that's where, I guess... So to me, I doubt that I'd play any of the folios all that much. I didn't play Napoleon at Waterloo very much. I don't break out those little games and play them too much. Part of my feeling here was, hey, I want to play something that's not tiny, but has this kind of flavor, and I've been kind of into the Zucker Napoleonics, and I want to look at this. Okay, great, whatever. But I was really in the mood for playing this out, and I enjoyed myself. There's no question there. There's something neat about going back to these old games that were really, really simple, you know? And that's why I don't want to expand them. That's why I don't want to add a little bit more detail about the cav charges or this, that, and the other. I don't feel like the abstracted system is all that unrealistic. I feel like it provides something that's believable in terms of the outcome, in terms of the general flow of what's going on. I think some of the specific rules that have to do with the game probably are more at fault for not capturing the campaign as correct, as historically happened. Okay. So you had some weird things here, like I had some gripes about like the idea of leaders being wiped out and then that command is never going to be really in command again. Well, it didn't turn out to be that big a deal. There's a little bit of leeway so that the units that are in that command can end up in command directly under their army leader. You don't want to lose your leaders. There isn't much reason to lose your leaders unless you play with a certain optional role, which I did. And it gives you some slight advantage where every now and then you might want to risk your leaders for that. What I did find kind of difficult with the leaders was feeling like I could divide up my... I didn't feel like I could divide up my commands as much as probably would have been a plausible scenario for Napoleon. But then again, Le Retour doesn't really allow it either, or for Wellington and Blucher. Those games relied on written orders, though, so I could conceivably make up some rules that aren't in the system, or use one of the configurations of written orders that allow you to kind of just, hey, write what you want, do what you want, we don't care. Which is what, you know, I break down to in those tactical systems when I do CWB or something. Sometimes I fiddle with the rules on the command just to allow myself to do something that looks like I should be able to do it. Why not? You know? Here I didn't feel like I have that freedom in the same way. Here it feels like the rules are more nailed down than the command rules in, especially Le Retour, but even in CWB. Here they're all based on how far away are you from X, Y, and Z. You know, Napoleon, or whoever your army commander is, you have 3 on each side. Whatever your army commander is can command a number of corps equal to his rating, and then a number of additional units equal to his rating, and that's all within 5 hexes of him, and then the corps commander can command things within 3 hexes of him. And that's how command and control is going to be handled in this game, and if you start tinkering with that a little bit, well, you're again breaking that simplicity. And so it's got to stand, in my view, on the rules as written. Just because these rules were designed at such a level of abstraction that you don't really know what tinkering with them is going to do very well. And there may have also been some degree of competitive design to the game, in the sense that, not that games were designed competitively, but that the game is designed to be a competitive challenge. Now, that's one of the things then that I'm going to critique it on, and I think the Grand Campaign is a really, really tough game for the French to win. I'm looking at it and I don't see how the Brits can't sort of prevent the French from exiting units off the board. That's not absolutely vital to victory, but I think in effect it is. Just because the amount of casualties the French would have to cause if they're not going to go for trying to drive off the board is completely ridiculous. although maybe no more ridiculous than driving some of their units off the board. I can see where you might be able to slip in behind or sneak units in, but the way the victory conditions work, I think the French are going to have a really hard time winning the Grand Campaign of this. Which is a particular pity, because the victory conditions for the Grand Campaign don't really reflect victory on the field. They reflect something much, much larger than that. They reflect a victory to such a degree that you've either, wiped out the Prussian and Anglo-Allied armies with very little loss to yourself, or you've cut Wellington off from his supply sources so badly that his army probably would surrender. Well, if you're talking about that level of victory, that level of effect, hey, Napoleon historically lost this damn battle. Now, that level of victory might try to convince a French player to work harder and to try to do things that, could end up losing him the battle, because his forces are better than the English and Prussian army, and especially than the Prussian army. And the situation at Ligny is pretty dangerous for the Prussians, because they are outnumbered there. And the French can probably hold off at Canabras, which means, hey, do I win at Ligny, get a draw at Canabras perhaps, like I did, and then say, yeah, okay, well, I won, that's good enough, I did better than Napoleon. Is that a fair game? I don't know. And it's just one of the problems with trying to represent, a tactical battle accurately in terms of the victory conditions. I tried pretty hard to meet the victory conditions, and I feel did better with Napoleon than they did historically. I would say at the end of what I played, I got what I would call, a French minor victory. Given that I don't think that the actual victory is even a reasonably plausible possibility against competent Allied play, I don't know how much more I can really expect than that. Anyway. One of the interesting rules in it to try to control Napoleon's advance after Ligny, Grouchy's advance after Ligny, was supposed to drive the Prussians off to one side while Napoleon pushed the French towards Brussels. Or, the French, but also pushed the British towards Brussels. The game handles this with one rule, the supply rule, which takes effect only at the first daylight turn of each day. Which means that you'll have the possibility of bringing the Prussians into Waterloo, into La Belle Alliance, after, or Mont Saint-Jean if you'd rather, 3 names, 1 battle, after they've dealt with Wavre. But it also does give some possibility for the French to kind of separate those two armies, depending on when they get moving and where they're positioned and everything. It may be the best solution available, because if you make the Prussians deal with their supply line all the time, well, then the French can tie the Prussian army down pretty easily, because their supply line running from Wavre, or off-map on Wavre, to Waterloo is a tough supply line, and there's no real way to represent how Grouchy got lost. And that's actually one of the issues with it. In addition to, hey, it may be pretty hard for the French to win this game. The other side of it is, it's also pretty hard, I think, for the Allies to win the battle, given how many things are not scripted in the game. Which you can see as either positive or negative. Certainly when I played Le Retour, the freedom of being able to control your units all over the map, even within the command and control rules, and this, that, and the other. There were a lot of mistakes made on the French side, really big ones, and you're kind of freed from all of those, which means that you have most of your force available most of the time and are able to kind of defeat the Allied armies piecemeal. So it's not like it would be fair just to say, well, okay, you know, you did better than Napoleon. The game allows you to do better than Napoleon pretty easily. Anyway, the supply rule might be the best answer for trying to capture that situation, but it does feel a little weird. I kind of felt like Blucher was too worried about his supplies, and then all at once, yeah, I don't care anymore, you know? And that's kind of, so there's this 3-day delimiter on the whole game, which is kind of part of the problem, because if we were in the situation that I played, there was probably be another day of maneuvering, and it may not be on the same battlefield, same terrain, and that's always a problem with these games that are, you know, the larger, almost grand tactical level. That's what I would call this, where you have a lot of maneuverability and a lot of space to cover, but, you know, honestly, the goals are kind of outside the map, and you have the same in tactical. The goals are outside the map. You should be doing things that are beyond that. And there's just really no answer. The victory conditions are the best that you can have to guide you towards that, and I can't think of anything that would necessarily do a better job than this. It's just realize that you probably cannot win as the French, and get upset about it like I do, and then, you know, move on to the next game where you can't win with one side or the other. The optional rules, I think, work pretty well. Cav retreat before combat allows them a lot more of the flexibility that they have of screening, etc., but they're impetus and control rules, which mean that you have to advance with a single cav some of the times based on a die roll. Hey, that's kind of cool. The leader advantage, if you got leaders in a stack, you can move the whole stack into the hex on an advance. That's kind of cool. The demoralization rules add a little bit of flavor, a little bit of chrome. None of that's really necessary, but all of it kind of leads to giving you a little bit more flavor of the era and a little bit less of that, okay, well, I'm playing another generic locking zones of control, simple combat movement, you know, SPI style CRT game. For me, I think the rule set works better. This type of rule set works better on the Napoleonic battles than it does on the American Civil War stuff. I think it definitely works better than it does on a World War II setting. Certainly better than a tactical World War II where it wouldn't even make much sense at all. So, you know, if you want to play something with this set of rules, and you'll see that Breitenfeld and the 30 Years War Quad use a different set of rules. I think this set of rules actually works best, perhaps, in the Napoleonic era. And that kind of says something for it. It kind of makes sense why Napoleon at Waterloo was one of their earlier games. You have to tweak the system, I think, more to get into something else. Anyway, at some point or another, we'll take a look at some of the other Zucker tactical stuff. It's built on the same system, but includes cards and all kind of stuff that I don't know yet. This is the first time I've played one of the Zucker battle games, so, you know, I'm kind of interested to see where it goes. It certainly didn't frustrate me the way that some of his operational games do, in terms of, I don't know, they don't really frustrate me usually, although some of them have, they've seen recently, but they kind of, they feel like a blandness to them. This felt exciting, it felt fun, it was about the level I was into. I like tactical games. I usually like more detail in my tactical games from TSS onward, but honestly, every now and then I want to pull something out that's not not a lot of rules weight. Although I did have trouble because, and you'll catch me cursing it out a few times, the level of abstraction in this simple set means that some of the things are easily confused, at least by my poor little brain. So demoralization and out of command, I couldn't keep track of which one was which in terms of the effects, because honestly, for example, demoralization's effects were that you can move in an attack, you just can't advance after combat. But out of command's effects were you can't move into combat, and any results that are kind of in your favor turn into retreats against you, which to me is just totally counterintuitive, and I'm not sure what the reasoning is behind that. Maybe a copy and paste error. I really don't know, but it does seem like it goes the wrong way to me. I played it as written as best as I could, where I didn't screw it up. Anyway, that's Napoleon's Last Battles. I have some other games using the same kind of system, and I really don't see the difference between this and Napoleon or Waterloo and Napoleon's Art of War. The other games I have in that same design concept for Napoleonic, I think mainly came out from 3W, although maybe some later SPI, S&Ts, Archduke Charles and Napoleon. There was a set of battles from that. And you know, I don't know how many of those do you really need, and this is the big one. It's cool to be able to see all of the Waterloo campaign on really, you know, what amounts to a 2-map. You know, it took up my table, right? That's about a normal 2-mapper. It's in 4 pieces, and you have to cut it and trim it, but whatever. It worked for me. Anyway, overall positive feelings. Overall, what I expected to.